Have you ever made a choice that wasn't really yours, but changed your life forever? In the wild winds of Montana, a young woman named Evelyn Hart was sent to marry a man she'd never met in her sister's place. What would you do if your own family traded your future like a coin? Would you obey or run? Evelyn obeyed. She rode into a stranger's world, carrying another woman's name, and found a quiet man, Lucas Wilder, and his little girl who'd forgotten how to smile. But what happens when a lie built to survive begins to bloom into something real, something sacred? Would you tell the truth and lose everything? Or would you stay silent and hold on to the only love you've ever known? This is not just a story about a bride sent by mistake. It's about forgiveness, faith, and how sometimes the wrong name leads you to the right home. Stay with us because love, like the Montana sky, is bigger than any secret. If this story already stirs something in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what happens next on Frontier Hearts. Autumn, 1883. The wind in Copper Hollow. Colorado had turned sharp, biting against the bones of the mountains and whispering that winter wasn't far behind. It carried more than just the scent of snow. That morning it carried judgment. People in town said certain names drew misfortune like storm clouds, and one of those names belonged to the Hart family. At the edge of the settlement stood the old Hart house, weathered but still proud. Its green shutters clattered with each gust, as if the home itself resisted the chill creeping in. Inside the parlor, a young woman stood stiff as a post, clutching a worn travel bag in both hands. Evelyn Hart, barely 20, had the look of someone who had run out of choices. Across from her, her stepmother Margaret Hale stood like a marble statue, arms folded, eyes cool and unyielding. "You will go, Evelyn," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And you will go, today." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. "He asked for Charlotte, not me." Margaret's lips pressed thin. "Charlotte is 17, a child. You are older, more practical. She's your daughter," Evelyn whispered. "And you are not." The words escaped before she could stop them, slicing through the silence like a blade. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. The sting in Margaret's eyes quickly hardened into contempt. Evelyn wished she could take it back, but it was too late. Her gaze drifted toward the staircase, hoping foolishly that her half-sister might appear, that Charlotte would speak up, beg her mother to reconsider. But the only answer was stillness. Charlotte had always been the darling, the golden one, adored and protected. Evelyn couldn't even blame her for staying silent. But that silence cut deeper than any insult. "I won't pretend to be her." Evelyn tried again, her voice trembling but steady. "You won't need to pretend much," Margaret replied. "Just use her name. The man will be grateful anyone came at all." In her stepmother's hand was the letter, the one Evelyn had read so many times. The paper had softened at the folds. The handwriting was plain but firm, the words straightforward, almost gentle. Lucas Wilder, 35, widower, one daughter, age 6, a man of few promises, save these a roof, a place, and kindness. Those words had stirred something inside her the first time she read them, but kindness was something Margaret had little use for. "Stay here," Margaret said coldly, "and you'll scrub floors until your back breaks. Go, and maybe you'll have a roof of your own." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. By sundown, Evelyn had packed her few belongings, 2 dresses, a Bible, and the letter that had somehow become her compass. She pressed a trembling kiss to Charlotte's cheek, though the girl didn't return it, and then climbed into the waiting stagecoach, bound west toward the Montana Territory. The journey felt endless. Days blurred together in a haze of dust and rattling wheels. The air grew thinner as the coach climbed higher into the wild country. At night, when the world outside turned black and the wind moaned through the cracks, Evelyn kept the folded letter pressed against her palm. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "let him be decent. Let the child be kind. Let this not be the end of me." When the coach finally rolled to a stop at Sagebrush Ridge, the sun was low and burning red behind the hills. The light gilded the fields and the barn roofs in bronze, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. She stepped down, bracing for disappointment. She'd imagined a sagging shack, a tired mule tied to a fence post, and a man too lonely to care who showed up. But before her stood a solid log house with green shutters and a porch lined with drying herbs. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, curling into the crisp mountain air. The barn was sturdy, the fences mended, the chickens fat and curious. It was not a picture of ruin, but of quiet, working order. And then she saw him. A man emerged from the barnyard, rolling down his sleeves as he walked. Lucas Wilder was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered, his skin browned by the sun and his stride purposeful. He looked capable, not desperate. A dusting of flour marked one arm, as if he'd been baking instead of breaking horses. His eyes, steady and blue as mountain lakes, met hers as he removed his hat. "You must be Miss Hale," he said with a courteous nod. "Charlotte, isn't it?" The name caught in her throat. For an instant she almost told him the truth, but fear won. "Yes," she managed. "I'm Charlotte." A faint smile touched his lips. "You're early. That's a good sign." From the doorway behind him, a small figure peeked out. A little girl with 2 uneven braids and freckles dusted across her nose. She hid quickly behind Lucas's leg, though curiosity glimmered in her wide eyes. "This is Maisie," he said gently. "She's shy, but she's got a big heart." Evelyn's chest tightened. The girl's expression, half wary, half hopeful, struck something deep inside her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her like that, without judgment, just wonder. Lucas took a step closer, reaching for her travel bag. Their fingers brushed. The brief touch sent a rush of warmth through her, even as shame prickled her skin. He was treating her with quiet, unassuming kindness she hadn't earned. "Come inside," he said. "Supper's waiting. Rabbit stew." She followed him in. The scent of thyme and fresh bread wrapped around her the moment she crossed the threshold. The firelight flickered across polished floorboards, glinting on a simple rocking chair that swayed gently, as if someone had only just left it. The house wasn't grand, but it was clean and lived in alive with care. It was the first place in years that didn't feel like punishment. Lucas hung his hat and gestured toward the table, where a pot of steaming stew sat between 2 plates. "After supper," he said, "I'll show you your room. I figured you might want your own space until you're settled." Evelyn looked up in surprise. She had expected a man eager to claim a wife, not one offering her privacy. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's considerate." Across from her, Maisie sat at the table, her chin barely clearing the edge. She kept sneaking looks at Evelyn, only to dart her gaze away whenever their eyes met. Her braids were crooked, her dress patched at the elbows, but her little face carried a spark of intelligence that tugged at Evelyn's heart. "Maisie," Lucas said with quiet encouragement, "say hello properly." The girl gave a shy nod, murmuring something barely above a whisper. "That's enough for now. Lucas said with a smile. "She'll warm to you soon enough." Evelyn smiled faintly and dipped her spoon into the stew. The flavor surprised her, rich and seasoned. Nothing like the watery broth she'd known in Copper Hollow. The fire crackled softly, and the tension that had gripped her shoulders since the journey began started to ease. She looked at Lucas across the table. His manner was calm, steady, the sort of man who didn't fill silence just to break it. When he poured her a cup of coffee, his hands were strong but gentle, deliberate in every motion. She noticed the lines near his eyes, the marks of someone who'd seen grief but had chosen to live with it rather than drown in it. By the time supper ended, her exhaustion caught up to her. Lucas led her upstairs to a small, tidy room, a handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a basin of water set beside it, curtains drawn against the mountain chill. "If you need anything," he said from the doorway, "my room's next to yours. Just knock on the wall." Evelyn swallowed hard, overwhelmed by his decency. "Thank you, Mr. Wilder." He gave a slight nod. "Lucas will do." When the door closed and she was finally alone, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling in her lap. The wind outside pressed against the windows, soft and restless. She thought of Margaret, of Charlotte, of the lie that had carried her here. But the warmth in the walls, the scent of bread still lingering in the air, it all felt too real, too good to belong to someone else's name. Lying back against the quilt, Evelyn whispered into the quiet, "Let this be a beginning, not another mistake." Downstairs, the fire popped and settled, and somewhere in the next room, the small voice of Maisie Wilder hummed a lullaby, sweet and off-key, the sound of innocence echoing through the house that would soon become, whether by truth or by lie, the heart of Evelyn's new life. The next days at Sagebrush Ridge passed in a quiet rhythm that wrapped itself around Evelyn before she even realized it. The air smelled of pine and smoke and the faint sweetness of hay. Every sunrise found the mountains tipped with gold. Every night the stars burned low and close, as if they could be plucked from the sky with bare hands. It didn't take long for Evelyn to learn the sounds of the house. The creak of the stair before dawn when Lucas went out to the barn, the gentle clatter of dishes when little Maisie tried to help with breakfast, the steady hum of the wind moving through the valley. The world here felt slower, and yet her heart hadn't slowed at all. That first evening, after supper, Lucas had reached for a tin teapot on the stove. His movements were careful and practiced, each one deliberate. He poured 2 cups, sliding one toward her. "Chamomile," he said, voice calm as the ticking clock. "Good for travel weariness." Evelyn wrapped her fingers around the cup, the warmth seeping into her palms. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had offered her something so small, so kind. That simple act, a cup of tea, a steady voice was enough to loosen the wall she'd built around herself. "Thank you," she murmured. Lucas just nodded, taking a sip. His eyes held a patience she didn't know how to meet. A man of few words, but each one seemed to mean something. When he showed her to her room upstairs, she found it waiting as though someone had been expecting her all along the bed, neatly made. A folded quilt at the foot, a pitcher of clean water on the stand, curtains drawn tight against the chill night. "If you need anything," he said from the doorway, "my room's next to yours. Knock on the wall." Evelyn could barely find her voice. "I thank you." He tipped his hat slightly before turning away, the lamplight catching on the edge of his profile. When the door clicked shut, the silence left behind felt almost tender. That night, Evelyn lay beneath the quilt, staring up at the wooden beams. The guilt of her deception gnawed at her, but the comfort of this place dulled the edge of it. It wasn't the kind of comfort that came from luxury. It was the comfort of safety, of air that smelled like earth, of kindness offered without demand. Somewhere near midnight, the house creaked. She thought at first it was the wind, but then came the faint sound of footsteps, light and hesitant. The door eased open with a soft groan. Standing there, clutching something close to her chest, was Maisie. Evelyn sat up quickly. "Maisie, sweetheart, is something wrong?" The little girl shook her head. Her bare feet padded across the floor until she reached the bedside table, in the glow of the dying lamp. Evelyn saw what she held, a small rag doll, its button eyes worn, one arm stitched back on with mismatched thread. "For you," Maisie whispered, voice barely more than breath. Evelyn blinked. "For me," Maisie nodded solemnly, then turned and hurried back toward the door before Evelyn could say another word. When the door closed, Evelyn reached out and touched the doll with trembling fingers. The fabric was soft from years of being loved. It wasn't much in the eyes of the world, but to Evelyn it felt priceless. It was trust tiny, fragile, and pure. The days that followed wove themselves into something resembling peace. Evelyn rose early to help in the kitchen, kneading dough while Maisie sat nearby, humming nonsense songs. In the evenings, she read aloud from a weathered book Lucas kept by the fire stories of angels and faraway stars. Maisie would curl up against her side, listening until her lashes grew heavy. One night, just as the child was slipping into sleep, she mumbled softly, "I prayed for a mama. God sent you after all." The words landed like sunlight through a cloud. Evelyn froze, her breath catching. Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. She pressed a kiss to Maisie's hair, her heart breaking and healing all at once. For the first time, she felt she belonged not because of the name she wore, but because of the love of a child who didn't care what that name was. Spring thaw came slowly to the valley. The snow melted into rivulets that wound through the pastures, softening the hard ground beneath their boots. Evelyn found rhythm in the work, the chopping, the planting, the tending of things that grew. Lucas invited her to the garden behind the barn most mornings. Together they turned the soil, planting rows of squash and beans. He showed her how to prune the berry bushes that clung stubbornly along the fence. He never ordered her about or corrected her. He simply guided, his voice low and patient, his hands steady as the earth. One morning, brushing dirt from his palms, he said, "You'll have your own patch soon. Whatever you want to grow." Evelyn laughed. "What if I'm terrible at it? Then we'll grow weeds," he said with a small grin. "They're loyal." The sound of her laughter surprised them both. Lucas looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. She turned away quickly, cheeks warm, heart pounding in her chest. Evenings became her favorite part of the day. Once Maisie was kissed good night and tucked under her quilt. Evelyn and Lucas would sit on the porch watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue. Sometimes they talked about books, chores, weather. Other times they just sat in silence. But that silence was alive, full of possibility, like spring before bloom. One late afternoon, Lucas came in from the barn, brushing straw from his sleeves. "We're going into town tomorrow," he said. Evelyn looked up from the mending she was doing. "For supplies?" He hesitated. "And for you?" For me, he smiled a little, almost shy. "You deserve more than one worn-out dress. If you're to be part of this family, you should feel like you belong." her hands stilled on the fabric. She wanted to protest, to remind him she wasn't really who he thought she was, but the words caught in her throat. Deep down, a part of her longed to say yes, to be seen as someone worth that kindness. The next morning they set out early. The ride to Copper Hollow took the better part of the day. Lucas's coat was draped over her shoulders to keep out the bite of wind. The closer they drew to town, the more she realized how well-liked he was. People called his name from porches, waved as they passed. When they stepped into the general store, the clerk straightened instantly. "Morning, Mr. Wilder," the man greeted. "Miss." Lucas nodded politely. "We'll need flour, sugar, and—" he glanced at Evelyn. "A few other things." He moved easily through the aisles, choosing supplies and a couple of dresses, one the color of pale sky, another a soft golden shade like wheaten sunlight. He added a sturdy pair of boots and a ribbon he claimed matched her eyes. Evelyn touched the fabric with uncertain fingers. "You don't have to, I know," he said softly, "but I want to. Outside." The wind carried the smell of rain and wild sage. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, quiet but certain. She had arrived here wearing another woman's name, but each day that passed, it felt less like a disguise and more like she was finally remembering who she was meant to be. As the wagon rolled back toward Sagebrush Ridge, she glanced sideways at Lucas. His hands on the reins were steady, his expression calm. Maisie would be waiting at home, likely peering through the window for the first glimpse of them. Evelyn looked toward the horizon, where the mountains rose blue against the setting sun. The wind smelled of earth and promise. Somewhere deep inside her, a fragile hope began to root itself, the kind that grows slow and stubborn, the kind that just might last. At the jeweler's, Lucas Wilder held a small gold necklace in the light. The pendant was a poppy, delicately carved and gleaming like morning sun on wheat. The jeweler explained softly, "It means hope, hope from sorrow." Lucas turned to Evelyn Hart, his expression unguarded. "May I?" Her breath caught as she nodded. His fingers brushed the base of her neck while fastening the chain, and the contact sent a tremor through her. The pendant rested against her skin light as air, heavy as truth. Back at the homestead, Evelyn stood before the mirror in the pale blue dress he had bought for her. The gold poppy caught the glow from the window, glinting like a tiny fire at her throat. For a long time, she stared at her reflection. She looked like someone she didn't recognize, someone she might learn to be. If the lie she lived didn't crush her first. It wasn't her name, he'd said when he'd written that letter. It wasn't her name stitched into his thoughts. And yet, every time Lucas looked at her with quiet warmth, the ache inside her deepened. One evening, the air outside the cabin glowed honey-colored. The valley bathed in songbirds and the scent of damp pine. Maisie hummed softly inside, arranging her dolls by the fire. Evelyn and Lucas sat side by side on the porch, watching the light fade over the hills. After a long silence, Lucas spoke, his voice low and roughened by memory. "Do you know what I thought when I buried my wife?" Evelyn's breath hitched. He had never spoken of her before. "I thought my life's color had ended," he said. Then his eyes turned toward her. "But lately, the light's come back." She looked at him, stunned. He met her gaze steadily. "You brought it back." Evelyn, her hands curled in her lap, torn between confession and longing. The words rose to her lips. "I'm not who you think I am," but her heart betrayed her. The longing spoke louder than the truth. She said nothing, and still. Lucas smiled. as though her silence was the answer he'd been waiting for. Days settled into a quiet pattern, soft, unhurried, full of small joys she had never known. Evelyn found herself rising each morning to the gentle clatter of hooves, the whistle of the kettle, and the warmth of sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows. Happiness didn't arrive all at once. It grew like the crops in their gardens, slow, steady, rooted in the shared rhythm of living. Every laugh from Maisie, every glance from Lucas that lingered just a little too long, built a fragile peace she hadn't believed she deserved. She began to sew, for the first time in years. Napkins, pillow covers, a small handkerchief for Maisie, embroidered with tiny violets in one corner. The child adored it, carrying it everywhere, refusing to let it out of her sight. In the evenings, Evelyn read stories aloud by the hearth while the fire danced shadows across the walls. Maisie would curl against her side, her eyes heavy with sleep. When the child finally drifted off, Lucas would watch from his chair, the same soft expression always on his face. "You've made this house warmer," he said once, absently as he stood beside her at the stove. "Feels like home again." The word home struck something deep in her. The way he said it, it wasn't about the cabin. It was about her. Evelyn smiled, but her heart tightened. She wasn't who he believed she was. He didn't know she hadn't been the one to answer his letter, that she had come in another woman's name, driven by desperation, not destiny. Each night, she waited for the truth to burst free, to destroy everything she had come to love. Sometimes she stood by her window, watching moonlight shimmer across the pastures, wondering how much longer she could live beneath a borrowed name. Other nights, she lit a single candle and opened her journal, her handwriting slanted and trembling. "I love them. I love him. And yet I cannot breathe beneath this lie. I am not Charlotte. I am Evelyn." She would close the book quickly, hiding it away like contraband, sealing her heart behind the cover. Still, Lucas's quiet affection made it harder. He never demanded, never questioned. He didn't ask why she sometimes fell silent mid-laughter, or why her gaze drifted away when his lingered too long. He simply offered space, trust, and a patience that cut deeper than anger ever could. Each time she meant to confess, something stopped her. Maisie would tug her hand and beg, "Will you read the rabbit story again?" Or Lucas would place a mug of tea beside her elbow and say, "You look tired, sweetheart," his voice laced with gentle concern. And just like that, the words she needed to speak would vanish into the steam. One stormy evening, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, tracing the stitching on the tablecloth. The wind rattled the shutters, rain whispering against the windows. She whispered to the empty room, "If I tell the truth, will they still love me?" No answer came, only thunder rolling across the valley, heavy and low. The next afternoon, the air thickened with the promise of another storm. Evelyn stood at the window, drying her hands on a linen towel after tending the herbs by the sill. Maisie played on the rug, singing off-key to her wooden dolls, her little voice bright against the distant rumble of thunder. Then came a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate, foreign. Lucas wiped his hands on his trousers and crossed the room to answer it. When the door swung open, two women stood on the porch, rain pooling at their feet. Evelyn's heart turned to ice. She knew that face, the pale skin, the golden curls, the knowing smirk. Charlotte Hale. Behind her, Margaret Hale stood stiffly, her smile polite but cold. Lucas blinked in surprise. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Margaret's voice was honeyed, practiced. "Mr. Wilder? I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. We've come a long way. This is my daughter, Charlotte. We're looking for a girl who went missing, her stepsister. We heard she might be here." Evelyn's knees weakened. She gripped the back of a chair, her world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat. "I'm Charlotte," the young woman said sweetly, stepping forward, silk skirts brushing against the wet porch boards. "And I believe you've been deceived." Lucas frowned, confusion crossing his face. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway to the parlor, Maisie clutching her hand. Her name, her real name, hovered at the edge of her tongue, but her voice refused to come. Charlotte's parasol twirled idly in her hand, the gesture elegant and cruel. "She's always been jealous, you know, of my dresses, my attention, my affection. I never thought she'd go so far as to steal my letters or my place." Lucas turned to Evelyn slowly, searching her face. "Is this true?" Evelyn forced herself to step forward, her pulse pounding in her ears. "The letters came in her name," she said softly. "That part's true, but I didn't steal them. I was sent forced. Really, but everything since I arrived, every word, every moment, has been mine." Charlotte let out a wounded sound, too dramatic to be sincere. "You see, she always twists things, always wants what isn't hers." Her mother added coldly, "You played house and got caught. It's time to face the truth." "Evelyn." Maisie clung tighter to her skirt, whispering. Mama Evelyn bent and touched the child's cheek. "It's all right, sweetheart. You are never the lie." Lucas's expression was unreadable now. His blue eyes shadowed. Charlotte reached for his arm. "I can make this right," she said softly. "For you, for your daughter." Evelyn looked up at him one last time. His silence was worse than anger. It was disbelief. She straightened, her voice trembling but clear. "Then I won't burden you any longer," gathering her few things. She kissed Maisie's forehead through tears and stepped out into the storm. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drenching her within moments. She didn't look back. She couldn't, because if she did, if she saw that house, that child, that man she loved, she might never have the strength to walk away. Behind her, thunder cracked open the sky, and as she disappeared down the muddy road, the poppy pendant at her throat glowed faintly in the lightning's flash, a fragile spark of hope refusing to die. The woman's hair shimmered gold under the gray light, pinned into curls too perfect for the wilderness. Beside her stood Margaret Hale, stiff-backed and smiling the brittle smile of someone used to getting her way. "Mr. Wilder," Margaret said, her tone sweet and sharp all at once. "I hope you'll forgive our interruption. We've come a long way. This is my daughter, Charlotte." Her words hung in the air like frost. Evelyn Hart stood in the archway, her hands cold, Maisie clutching her fingers. "We're looking for a young woman." Margaret continued smoothly. "My stepdaughter. We heard she might be here." Lucas Wilder's brow furrowed, his quiet eyes turning watchful. "I'm Charlotte," the girl in silk announced, stepping forward with a practiced curtsy. "And I'm afraid you've been deceived." Evelyn's breath caught. She couldn't move. Charlotte pressed a gloved hand to her chest, her expression painted with innocence. "I didn't know what she'd done until it was too late. She stole my letters, left home, pretending to be me. I was worried sick." Lucas turned toward Evelyn. His voice, calm but edged, broke the silence. "Is that true?" Evelyn stepped forward slowly. "The letters came in her name," she admitted. "That part is true. But I didn't steal them. I was sent forced, really. But every word, Every kindness since I arrived has been mine, no one else's." Charlotte let out a delicate gasp, the sound perfectly rehearsed. "She's always wanted what was mine, my dresses, my mother's favor, my suitors. I never thought she'd take something like this, something meant for me." Lucas' voice was steady but low, something like what Charlotte's eyes shone with false sorrow. "You, this home, a life that was supposed to be mine." The accusation hit harder than a blow. Evelyn swallowed hard, refusing to cry. "She can have the name," she said quietly, "the gowns, the letters, whatever she came for, but she can't have what I felt, what I still feel." Lucas's gaze didn't waver. "I trusted you," he said, the words soft but devastating. "I never lied about how I felt," she whispered, standing taller. "That doesn't change what you are." Margaret cut in sharply. "A liar, whether by words or silence. You played house, and now you've been found out." Maisie clung tighter to Evelyn's skirt. Mamma the child whimpered. Evelyn knelt, brushing her fingers against the girl's cheek. "It's all right, sweetheart. You are never the lie." Lucas's eyes flickered, some emotion passing through them, something she couldn't name, but he said nothing. Charlotte laid a gentle hand on his arm, her voice silky. "I can fix this," she said. "I'll stay. For Maisie. For you." Lucas looked between them, between the woman he'd come to care for and the one the world told him he was meant to marry. When he finally spoke, his tone was quiet, but final. "I don't even know who you are." The words shattered Evelyn more completely than anger ever could. She nodded once, lips trembling. "Then I won't burden you any longer." Without another glance, she turned, gathered her few belongings, kissed Maisie's forehead one last time, and walked out into the storm. Rain began in a whisper, then turned heavy, drumming against the roof as she reached the end of the path. Her dress clung to her skin, her boots squelched in the mud. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back, because if she did, she would never find the strength to leave. Her heart, though, remained behind in the kitchen where laughter had lived, in the chair by the fire where she'd read bedtime stories, in the small hands that had called her Mama. She was leaving behind everything she had ever longed for. But she lifted her chin and kept walking, because even if he no longer saw her, she finally knew who she was, and she had never loved anything in her life with more truth than she had loved them. The storm passed, but the Wilder house felt colder than ever. Maisie hadn't spoken since Evelyn left. She refused breakfast, pushed away the biscuits Lucas baked that morning, and turned from the tea he offered. When Charlotte knelt beside her with a painted smile and a new porcelain doll, the child flinched and backed away. "She's just shy," Charlotte said lightly, brushing one golden curl from her shoulder. "She'll warm to me soon enough." But she didn't. Later that afternoon, Lucas found Maisie in the barn, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the chill. She sat curled in the hay, clutching the rag doll Evelyn had mended weeks earlier. "Maisie," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What's going on, Pumpkin?" The little girl turned away, burying her face in the straw. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then came a broken whisper. "She lied." He leaned closer. "Who lied?" Sweetheart Maisie's cheeks were red, her voice trembling. "That lady in the fancy dress. She says she's Charlotte, but she's not the real Mama." Lucas froze. "Why do you say that?" Maisie looked down at the doll in her hands. "Because the real Mama sings about the stars, The word struck him like lightning. He remembered that night Evelyn, standing by the fire, folding laundry as she sang softly, her voice sweet and off-key. The song had been about the stars watching over lonely wanderers. He hadn't been able to move, just stood there in the doorway, listening. "What makes you think she's your real mama?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Maisie blinked through her tears. "Because she stayed. She held me when I had bad dreams. She made me laugh when you were sad. She said my drawings were magic." The girl paused, clutching the doll tighter. "I prayed for her, and she came." Lucas' throat tightened. He stood slowly, his chest heavy with 100 unspoken things. Without a word, he left the barn and walked back to the house. In the guest room that had once been Evelyn's, everything was still. The bed was neatly made, the folded quilt untouched. Her scent lingered faintly, lavender and soap, and something warm he couldn't name. He opened the drawer of the nightstand and found it a small, leather-bound journal worn soft at the corners. He had seen her write in it before bed, but had never pried. Now, he hesitated only a moment before opening it. The first page stopped him cold. "I never meant to lie. I only meant to survive." He turned another page, then another. Her handwriting slanted gently, each line heavy with truth. "I came here under another name, but every heartbeat since has been mine. I love them, both of them, and I don't know how to live with what I've done." Each page was a window into her soul. He could almost hear her voice in the lines, feel her uncertainty, her hope, her shame, and beneath it all, love real, unpretending love. When he reached the last entry, his vision blurred. "If the truth ruins me, then let it. But I cannot regret a single moment in that house, because for a little while I was home." Lucas closed the journal, his hands trembling. He stared at the worn leather cover for a long time, then set it gently on the nightstand. Outside, the wind had quieted, but the world felt heavier somehow. In the doorway, Charlotte appeared, her smile hesitant. "Is she gone for good?" Lucas turned, and for the first time, his expression hardened. "You should leave, too." Charlotte blinked, taken aback. "What?" But he shook his head. "Whatever brought you here? It wasn't love. You and your mother have done enough harm. This is no longer your place." Margaret's voice echoed faintly from down the hall, protesting. But Lucas didn't hear the rest. He walked past her, past the parlor, and out into the dimming light. He didn't know where Evelyn had gone, only that the mountains swallowed the road west. But he knew this much: he wouldn't rest until he found her, because the house was just wood and stone. The life he wanted, the home he had felt alive in, was walking somewhere out there in the rain, and he intended to bring her back. The pages of Evelyn Hart's journal trembled in Lucas Wilder's hands. Her words spilled from the worn leather like confessions meant only for the quiet. She wrote of her first night under his roof, of fear and guilt, of Maisie's laughter that had become her favorite sound. She wrote about the way the house felt alive again, about the terrible beauty of being loved and afraid at the same time. By the final entry, his vision blurred. "If he asks me to leave, I will go. But I hope he remembers that what I gave was real. Every bit of it was real." Lucas closed the book and pressed it against his chest. She had never stolen anything not love, not belonging. She had simply lived and given all she could. It wasn't the name she'd worn that defined her. It was the truth she carried in her hands, in the way she cared for them both. And he had sent her away. He didn't hesitate. He ran for the stable, throwing a saddle over his black gelding. Within moments he was riding hard into the night. The wind howled against his ears, rain stinging his face as the sky broke open again. He didn't know where she'd gone, only that he would find her. He called her name into the dark, mile after mile, the sound of it swallowed by thunder. Near the edge of the woods, a small figure appeared on the muddy road, cloaked and soaked through. She stumbled forward, her head bowed against the storm. Lucas yanked the reins, heart hammering, "Evelyn." She turned, startled, eyes wide beneath dripping strands of hair. Her face was pale, her lips parted, but no words came. He swung down from the horse and crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Rain streamed from the brim of his hat as he stopped before her. "I don't care what name you used," he said, his voice breaking through the wind. "You were always you, and that's who I love." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "I know who wrote those letters," he went on, "but I also know who stitched Maisie's doll, who planted violets by the porch, who stayed up reading to a little girl that hadn't known a mother's touch. You are not just a name in ink. You are every bit of warmth that house ever had again." Her breath hitched. "Even if you lied by silence," he whispered, "you never lied in love. You, Evelyn Hart, are the truth I needed." She stared at him, tears mingling with the rain, then stepped forward and fell into his arms. The storm raged above them, but beneath it something mended a promise reclaimed. By morning, a soft mist clung to the hills beyond Sagebrush Ridge. The small depot in Willow Ridge was nearly empty, save for a few travelers waiting for the eastbound train. Evelyn stood on the platform with a single carpet bag at her feet. Her heart felt heavier than anything she carried. She had already said her goodbyes in her mind to Maisie's laughter, to Lucas's quiet hands around a cup of tea, to the scent of bread baking in the kitchen that had, for a while, felt like home. The whistle blew, sharp and lonely. Evelyn took a step toward the train, her fingers tightening around the handle of her bag. Then came the sound of hooves, fast and hard against the boards of the street. Evelyn. She froze. Lucas Wilder leapt from his horse, boots striking the platform with a thud. Rain still clung to his coat from the night ride, but his eyes were clear and steady. "I was going to let you go," he said, catching his breath, "but I can't be the man who watched you walk away." Evelyn's eyes filled, though she held herself still. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small gold chain. The poppy pendant gleamed in the morning light. "I bought this before I knew your name," he said softly, "before I understood any of it. But I still meant it. I bought it for the woman who made my daughter believe in angels again." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "It was never about a name," he continued. "It was about how you made us feel like home again. I don't care what you were called when you arrived. I care who you are when you smile at Maisie, when you hum in the kitchen, when you hold your breath before saying something kind." Her voice broke. "I didn't think I deserved any of this." "You deserve every bit of it," he said. Then, without hesitation, he lowered to one knee on the platform. "Evelyn Hart," he said, offering her the necklace as if it were a vow. "Will you come home? Not as a bride sent by mistake, but as the woman I choose the woman Maisie prayed would become my wife." Her heart stopped for a beat. Then she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will come home. They rode back to the ranch that afternoon, the sun breaking through clouds to wash the hills in gold. As they turned into the yard, the front door flew open before Lucas could even dismount. Maisie stood barefoot on the porch, her small face alight with joy. She ran full speed across the yard and threw herself into Evelyn's arms. "You came back," she cried, clinging tight. Evelyn pressed her face into the girl's hair. "I promised I would, if I could." Lucas stood behind them, watching with something almost reverent in his gaze. 2 days later, beneath the cottonwoods that bloomed behind the barn, they were married. There were no guests, no orchestra, no polished ceremony, only birdsong and the gentle rustle of the trees. Maisie placed a crown of wildflowers on Evelyn's head and handed her a bouquet of daisies and clover. The child beamed as if she'd built the whole world herself. Evelyn's dress was simple linen and lace borrowed from a chest that had once belonged to Lucas's late wife, carefully fitted by the seamstress from town. When Lucas took her hands beneath the filtered sunlight, the quiet of the valley held its breath. "I choose you," he said, his voice rough with feeling, "today and every day after." Evelyn smiled through tears. "And I choose this life, this home, and you." He slipped the poppy pendant around her neck once more, the symbol of everything they'd both lost and found again. As they kissed, the wind stirred the cottonwood branches overhead, scattering white petals like snow. Maisie laughed and clapped her hands, spinning in the shower of blossoms. For the first time, the Wilder Ranch truly felt alive, a place of laughter, forgiveness, and belonging. That evening, when the sun sank behind the mountains and painted the fields in bronze light, Evelyn stood on the porch beside Lucas. Inside, Maisie hummed to her dolls, the tune sweet and familiar, the same lullaby Evelyn had once sung about stars watching over wanderers. Lucas reached for her hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think hope was something that belonged to other men. But the day you arrived, even with all your secrets, you brought it back to me." Evelyn leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "It wasn't just me," she whispered. "It was all of us trying, failing, forgiving. That's what makes a family." The sky turned violet, and the first stars began to appear. Evelyn touched the gold poppy at her throat and smiled. For the first time in her life, she wasn't pretending. She was home. The wind carried their vows into the wide Montana sky, where even the cottonwoods seemed to lean closer to listen. Somewhere between the rustle of leaves and the call of meadowlarks, a woman once forgotten by her kin became someone deeply cherished by her own. Summer ripened slowly across the hills, painting the meadows in shades of gold and soft green. The Wilder Ranch bloomed not just with crops and wildflowers, but with peace. In the pale morning light, Evelyn Wilder stood on the porch, swaying gently as she cradled her newborn son. His dark curls peeked from beneath a knitted cap, and his tiny hand gripped the fabric of her dress, as if he already knew she belonged to him. Inside, laughter rang through the kitchen. "Mom, he ate my biscuit," Maisie's voice carried, full of mock outrage. Evelyn smiled to herself. The baby hadn't eaten it, he'd merely drooled on it. But to Maisie, that was offense enough. The two were already inseparable rivals one moment, companions the next. She remembered the first time Maisie had held her baby brother. The little girl had stared down at him, eyes wide with wonder. "We're really a family now, Mama," she'd whispered. That word Mama had once been tentative, uncertain. Now it lived in every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every whispered prayer. Evelyn hadn't earned it by blood or by promise. She'd earned it simply by staying, by loving, by being there. The screen door creaked open, and Lucas stepped out, hair tousled from sleep, coffee steaming in his hand. "She's still bossing everyone around in there," he teased. Evelyn chuckled softly. "Maisie runs this place, and you know it." He grinned and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Looks like this one's going to take after her already," he said, nodding toward their son. They stood together in quiet comfort, watching the sun climb above the ridge, the light spilling gold over the land they had built together. A few months earlier, Charlotte Hale had left Montana in disgrace. Her attempts to turn the town against Evelyn had failed spectacularly. The neighbors of Sagebrush Ridge had come forward one by one with stories of the woman who taught children to read, who had baked for the sick, who had sat beside a widow through long nights of grief. The truth, it turned out, had deeper roots than lies. No one remembered Charlotte's silks or her polished words, but they remembered Evelyn Wilder, the woman who had shown up, stayed, and stitched her heart into the fabric of their valley. That evening, as twilight stretched across the hills, Lucas sat at his desk by lamplight. His pen moved slowly across a sheet of paper addressed to an old friend in Copper Hollow. "Colorado. You asked if the bride I sent for ever arrived." He wrote, "She didn't. I got someone else entirely." He paused, smiling faintly, and continued, "I got the woman who sang lullabies in the dark when my little girl had nightmares. The one who stitched wildflowers into the hem of an old dress just to make Maisie laugh. The woman who never asked for anything but gave everything she had. I didn't get the bride I ordered, my friend. I got the one I was meant to find. And that's made all the difference." When the ink dried, he sealed the envelope and glanced toward the window. Outside, under the porch light, Evelyn rocked their baby in her arms. The glow wrapped around her like warmth itself. Her voice a quiet hum drifting into the night. Beyond her, the stars shimmered, the same ones she had once sung about when she felt lost and unworthy. Her name had not been the one written in his first letter, but now it was the name that echoed through the house, spoken with love, whispered in dreams, shouted in laughter. It was the name that meant home. En Ornti. Years later, the valley would remember Evelyn Hart Wilder as the woman who turned a lonely ranch into a place of belonging. They would tell stories of her kitchen that always smelled of bread and cinnamon, her porch light that never went dark, her gentle hand in the community she helped build. Some said she was sent by fate, others said by chance, but Maisie would always insist on something different. Whenever anyone asked how her mama came to the Wilder ranch, she would smile and say, "God sent her. He just forgot to sign the letter right." And in the laughter that followed, in the love that filled that house for generations, that truth remained. Because sometimes the right person arrives under the wrong name, but real love, always knows the truth. As we grow older, we begin to understand that life is not about getting what we planned. It's about finding grace in what we're given. Evelyn Hart's journey reminds us that even the deepest mistakes can lead us to truth, and that sometimes love arrives wearing an unexpected face. We all carry regrets, secrets, or moments we wish we could undo. Yet what truly defines us isn't where we came from, but how we choose to love when life gives us a second chance. Evelyn didn't earn her place by pretending to be someone else. She earned it by showing kindness when she could have turned bitter, by staying when it would have been easier to run. For anyone in their later years looking back on the roads you've walked, remember this: It's never too late to forgive yourself, to start again, and to believe that love still knows your name. The heart, after all, has no age. Thank you, dear friends, for joining us on this journey across the wide, open frontier of love and redemption. If Evelyn and Lucas's story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts. Your support keeps these stories alive, stories that remind us all that even in the roughest storms, love always finds its way home.